Man, has it been a while, those engineering reports, am I right? Anyway, after my 3-month-long hiatus, I'm finally off university and can make some videos for 2 weeks. If you guys remember, I made a video on Madoka Magica a while back, and while overall it was a positive review, I still gave my fair share of criticism with entropy and whatnot. Though amongst all the pseudo-intellectual physics knowledge that I know, I made quite a few jabs on Madoka Magica's third film, Rebellion, and a lot of you wondered why I dislike it. So I thought, what better way to celebrate my return than with more controversy? Today on the agenda, the problems with Madoka Magica Rebellion. Spoilers ahead. Directed by Akiyuki Shinbou and written by the Urobuchi, unlike the first two Madoka films which were essentially recaps with better animation, Rebellion is a sequel furthering the franchise from its already completed story. Now before I go on about why Rebellion isn't a good film, I'll ease people in by starting with what I liked about it and what the film does well, because it's not completely deprived of substance. There are much worse things out there. To start off, the production quality is absolutely stellar. Shaft did an amazing job with the animation of this film. They definitely set the bar high, and you can tell by the stark contrast between the TV series, combining even more bizarre live-action cutouts to make the world have an ominous and surreal atmosphere to the point of being overwhelming at times. You can really appreciate the effort that was put in to make a beautifully crafted piece of work, and the action scenes in the film are nonetheless jaw-dropping. Rebellion looks undoubtedly gorgeous, and it's reflected even more through its use of glowing colors in contrast to its dark surroundings, further adding to its eerie atmosphere. As for the sound design, it's fairly similar to its TV series counterpart, but I think it actually improves on the already existing themes and gives much more flair with its use of electric guitar and epic choirs. From its eccentric and joyful tracks to its tragic and somewhat haunting score, the blend between hope and despair really makes the soundtrack worth listening to. Not to mention that Yuki Kaijura actually combines separate character themes together, which is pretty awesome actually. ClariS makes her return with its stunning addition to the score being the opening theme Colorful, which surprisingly is my favorite song throughout the entire film. It's catchy, gives you a warm fuzzy feeling, but still has hints of somber tones within it. Strictly speaking, Rebellion is a visually impressive film with a superb soundtrack. Unfortunately, despite all the things the film does well, the same cannot be said about the story or characters. First of all, there is a distinct lack of continuity between the ending of the series and the beginning of the third film. The series ends with Homer walking through a desert field, presumably battling against the Wraiths, as can be seen. Rebellion, however, decides to open up with expositional dialogue explaining what a magical girl is, and then proceeds to cut straight into what essentially seems like a reset of the world with all the characters being alive. The discontinuity between the series and the film feels awfully out of place and is lacking the consistency the series had. I don't really have any major problems with the first act of the film, which is essentially Homer discovering that she's in a witch realm and then getting saved, though that's not to say it's particularly good either. The first hour and 30 minutes of Rebellion feels like it's trying to be a mystery detective noir by resetting the story but with a different variation in an attempt to confuse us, though it becomes fairly obvious after 30 minutes that they are in a witch realm. There's really no point for Act 1 of the film to be an hour and 30 minutes if you're going to solve the mystery for the audience fairly quickly, not to mention that Act 2 completely negates and overrides Act 1 due to its importance and the story and the way it carries, but doesn't even have half the amount of runtime. The pacing of this film isn't horrible, but it sure is inconsistent as hell. The first act feels slow and dragged on as it's just Homer trying to figure out what's going on, in contrast to its second act, which is far too rushed and contrived due to its grand scale and illogical narrative progression, but I'll talk about that a bit later. Let's move on to Rebellion's use of symbolism, cause that's always fun. Unlike the series where I said the symbolism didn't mean anything, this film actually has proper imagery scattered throughout, though that doesn't mean it uses it well. The symbolism used in Rebellion is incoherent and disjointed. What I mean by this is that it's either too obvious or too obscure at times. I have no problem if a show has obscure or simple imagery. It's when a show tries to mix them both together, then it becomes uncoordinated and disorganized. For example, the opening theme clearly conveys Homer's hopelessness, being unable to reach the person she deeply cares about, and this is even further complemented with a flower scene as Homer rejects Madoka and the perfect world she's in, which is shown by Homer unbraiding her hair after Madoka had just fixed it, and the flowers changing color to reflect the despair she's undergoing. It's simple, concise, and straightforward, but when you mix high chairs, weird structures, blimps, and abstract roads, you've completely lost the simplicity. Suddenly, in comparison, the opening theme where Homer is on her knees becomes... He's on her knees. It's so deep. So deep. It's so deep. So deep. And the flowers changing color becomes... Oh shit, not the flowers! Not the flowers! Urobuchi, please! What I'm getting at here is that if you place simple and abstract visuals next to each other and call the whole thing deep, regardless of what you'll see, you'll assume everything will have a profound message, meaning that imagery that was supposed to be taken lightly will be overanalyzed and be seen as 3 deep 5 me, since every other thing is too abstract in comparison. It's not to say everything in Rebellion will be seen this way, just the really obvious ones. Now, most of you are probably still very curious of why I dislike Rebellion, because the reasons reasons I've listed so far aren't too much cause of concern, and you would be right thinking so. I don't really have any major problems with the first hour and 30 minutes of the film. It's only until we get to Act 2 where my issues turn into a shitstorm. Here goes. The ending of Madoka Magica Rebellion has got to be one of the most, if not the most, convoluted, nonsensical, and illogical things I've seen in a long time. How in the flying fuck did Homura split Madoka? It makes no fucking sense. I've seen the film multiple times and nowhere does it explain or even hint that this isn't even feasible. Homura hadn't turned into a witch yet, and the last time I checked, her power was stopping time, so I don't want to hear any explanations of how Homura's despair, which was actually love, outweighed the despair of a despair of absorbing goddess, because that's absolute bullshit. How did Homura know that she could absorb Madoka and create a new universe while simultaneously becoming the devil? Do you know how fucking stupid that sounds? And for those who don't believe me that Homura knew this was going to happen, here's a quote from the devil herself. You've got to be shitting me, right? I'm like the guy from Deus Ex.
I never asked for this.
You're goddamn right I never asked for this. Just because you don't have the slightest clue of what's going on doesn't make Rebellion deep. In fact, you might as well just do this for the ending. I like this version better because either way, you still get fucked. There's no logical way for someone to explain how or why the ending turned out that way, not even following its own laws of the universe. All the explanations I've heard don't even come close to excusing the Deus Ex Machina plot device, and I don't think anything ever will. It's not because I'm ignorant or unwilling, it's because it's fundamentally flawed. You know what the great thing is? None of this would have happened if Kyubey didn't have a 25-minute long exposition explaining his plan to Homura and the premise of this film. He doesn't need to explain anything to Homura. It doesn't benefit him whatsoever. In fact, it's because Homura knows Kyubey's intentions to capture Madoka she planned on stopping him. She wouldn't have known jack shit if it weren't for the textbook 101 style of exposition, and that's not even considering how Kyubey trapped Homura in the first place. I guess forging a convenient story on the spot is better than showing one. Rebellion is so poorly written, like why would Madoka even come down to save Homura if it's later revealed that Homura's despair wasn't actually despair but rather love? It explicitly states right here. Madoka is the law of cycle. You cannot trick a law. Like seriously, fuck this film. Even the characters don't matter all that much except for Homura. The new character Bebe only has 6 lines of dialogue and really just is a pointless addition to the cast. Anyone who thinks otherwise is wrong. And the main cast itself aren't really characters much as they are tools for Homura's plan. Rebellion is just a clusterfuck of nonsense that people can somehow excuse its bad writing. I'm not gonna place all the blame on Urobuchi this time because it's really not his fault. In an interview with Gen Urobuchi, which I'll link in the description, he was asked, "We hear that the screenplay for Puella Magi Madoka Magica was finalized in 2009. Were you thinking of a sequel at the time?" To which he replied, "No, not at all. I never thought there would be a sequel. The TV series was never meant to have a sequel. That's why the ending was solid. It was the actual ending to Madoka. So what happened? Due to the overwhelming success of the TV series, producer Iwakami Atsuhiro and director Akiyuki Shinbou wanted a continuation. During the broadcast itself, we had our hands full in actually making the show, so there was no time to think about it next. But the fan reaction was above and beyond for what we hoped for, so I started wanting to make a sequel. Urobuchi was basically forced to write a continuation to a series he thought didn't need one, and the ambiguous ending that sets itself up for a very probable sequel wasn't even his idea. From the start, the idea was Homura becomes a witch and the story takes place inside her barrier, but at the time I wanted to end the story of Madoka taking Homura away with her, so I thought the story would end this time for real. But both Iwakami-san and Shinbou-san were like, "No, we want the story to keep going after this," and wouldn't give me the okay. So then I was getting really worried. Shinbou-san was like, "Might as well just make Madoka and Homura into enemies," and the suggestion was basically the breakthrough. It's sad to think that the original creator of a franchise is powerless to stop sequels of his own work being made. It's pretty despicable if you ask me, but everything is about money nowadays, so it's not that far-fetched to think Rebellion will most likely have a continuation in the future. Now, should you dislike Rebellion after this video? No. Should you change your opinion on Rebellion? No. I'm just saying, it's a pretty shit film. Fuck you, Matt.